The Holy One said to Aaron and Moses, "If Pharaoh says to you, 'Show me a miracle,' then you, Moses, are to tell Aaron to throw his staff at Pharaoh's feet and turn it into a serpent." Aaron and Moses went to the ruler and did as God had told them. Aaron threw down the staff before Pharaoh and the court officials, and it turned into a serpent. Then Pharaoh summoned the magicians and the sorcerers. The Egyptian magicians and sorcerers did the same thing through their sorcery. Each one threw down a staff, and it turned into a serpent. But Aaron's serpent swallowed all the others. Pharaoh's heart was hardened, however, and the ruler refused to listen to them, as God had foretold. Then the Holy One said to Moses, "Pharaoh's heart is heavy and stubborn, and he refuses to release my people. In the morning, go to the bank of the Nile when he comes down to the water to bathe. Have with you the staff you turned into a serpent. Tell him, 'The Holy One, the God of the Hebrews, sent me to say to you, let my people go, so they may worship me in the wilderness. Until now you have refused. So now the Holy One says to you, by this you will know that I am the Holy One, and with this staff I will strike the water of the Nile, and it will turn into blood. The fish in the river will die, the water will stink, and it will be not fit for drinking.' Then the Holy One said to Moses, 'Tell Aaron, take your staff and stretch your hand over the waters of Egypt, over its rivers, over its streams, over its canals, ponds, and cisterns, and they will turn into blood. Blood will be everywhere in Egypt, even in wooden vats and stone jars.' Aaron and Moses did as God told them, in the presence of Pharaoh and all the officials. Aaron raised the staff and struck the water. The entire river turned into blood. The fish in the Nile died, and the river stunk so badly that the people could not drink it. Everything in Egypt was bloody. But the Egyptian sorcerers and magicians did the same thing with their secret arts. So Pharaoh's heart remained hardened, and he refused to listen to Aaron and Moses, just as the Holy One had foretold. The ruler went back into the royal residence and took none of this seriously.
And Pharaoh took none of this seriously. Sometimes we feel as if power neglects the condition of the world. Sometimes it's like looking in a mirror and imagining that we too might be Pharaoh. For we're in a position of relatively comfort that we see the world through glasses that sometimes blocks out what we don't want to see. This past week, I've been thinking a lot about Hurricane Helene, those in the southeast, and especially in western North Carolina. Western North Carolina is dear to me because I'm a North Carolina native, but even though my family and where I grew up did not experience any of the disaster, I spent 2 summers as a college student in a program called Youth Corps, and I lived in 2 communities that were affected by this disaster. And I've been wondering about the youth and their families, and especially the two families that I lived with each summer that welcomed me in their home for 10 weeks as a big brother to a 10-year-old who sort of ruled the house, and then with a family whose two brothers had already graduated from college, and I was the baby brother for the summer. But as those towns have been lifted up just beyond Asheville, I wonder, does the world take any of these disasters seriously? For you see, there are times when we are located in places where we don't necessarily experience disaster to that scale. But it can happen anywhere. Even though folks believed Asheville was somewhat secure, a storm of that magnitude and 2 to 3 feet of rain can cause disaster. For example, my nephew, who goes to college in East Tennessee, did not have classes for 5 days this past week. And they've had a boil water advisory, which is relatively easy compared to the others. But when you think of the destruction, it now takes him almost an hour longer to get home to visit parents, because all the roads that he would have taken either through Asheville or Boone, North Carolina, are impassable or washed out. So a trip to North Carolina now requires going back up into Virginia and then back down. But the part that we are to take most seriously is what has been happening even before the storm. The environmental issue, which we clearly see, climate warming. But the thing that has went almost unignored in places similar to Western North Carolina and others are those small towns and the abject poverty that has been there forever. It is as if Pharaoh or others takes none of this seriously. For some, it's the cheapest trailer owned close by to the banks of the river that washed down. It is as if the waters of Egypt that were polluted, as if it's told in the story, are now polluted by sewage, by homes, and all. And finally, it appears that some are taking this seriously because eventually this is all going to come downstream. My friends, it's time to take things seriously. My friends, it's just not the environment. We live in a world where political leaders turned a blind eye to bombings that wipe out not only terrorists, but children and women, calling this for the state's safety. We live in a world where we don't quite take humanity as seriously as we should. But when we gather on a Sunday called World Communion Sunday, we do a very Protestant thing on some level. For there are a lot of Christians who have communion every Sunday of the year, even some of our ecumenical brothers and sisters, such as the Disciples of Christ, the Christian Church, the Lutherans, and others, where they gather around the table. We are the oddballs, the United Church of Christ, Methodists, Presbyterians, that we only do it occasionally. But sometimes we take such joy that today all the world's communion that we forget about the patterns of life that happen every time folks gather at the table. If we take World Communion seriously, It's not just that we all eat together today and we go about our businesses, that we are committing ourselves as brothers and sisters in Christ, in a God that loves us, that we will take the matters of the world seriously. We will take it serious enough that we just don't talk about it, we actually invest our lives in doing so. When we take things seriously, I believe that hope can bloom, change may happen, and love can mend this broken world. My friends, are you ready to get serious?